All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a period bursting with artistic energy. Renaissance theater.
A rebirth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our guide for this journey, this fantastic book, Renaissance Theater, A Rebirth of Art. We're going to explore how theater in this era wasn't just entertainment, it was reflecting some really big changes in how people thought.
Yeah, it's super interesting. These plays, they weren't just reflecting the changes, they were a part of them, participating in the big cultural and intellectual debates of that time, right in the thick of it.
So, can a picture for us, set the scene. What was happening in Europe that made this such fertile ground for this type of theater?
Okay, so picture Europe, 14th century,
Okay.
the old medieval order is starting to crumble,
Yeah.
and new ideas are popping up everywhere. And this is where the Renaissance gets its name, right?
Yeah.
It's all about a rebirth of classical learning and this huge surge in interest in human potential.
And where does theater fit into all of this?
Right in the center. It all starts in Italy, like this place that's just buzzing with artistic experimentation. And it spreads so quickly across Europe. England, Spain, France, they all get swept up in this theatrical revolution.
And this new energy, it shows up differently in each country, right?
Exactly. Think of Commedia dell'arte in Italy, all about improvisation, using stock characters and masks, just pure energy and wit, like a real reflection of how vibrant Italian society was at the time.
Okay, that sounds fun, but our source keeps bringing up humanism as this major driving force behind Renaissance theater.
It was huge.
So can you break that down a bit? What was humanism and how did it actually show up in the plays?
Okay, so humanism was this new philosophy that was all about emphasizing human reason and individuality.
Hmm.
And it was a big shift away from, the medieval focus on religious dogma.
So instead of looking to the church for all the answers, people were starting to think for themselves.
Exactly. And you see this reflected in the plays. Instead of being all about, divine will or religious morality, the characters in Renaissance theater start grappling with their own desires and ambitions.
So, are you saying that Hamlet's whole dilemma, for example, is more about him as a person, like an individual, than it is about some um, grand religious message?
Absolutely. You see
Yeah.
this move from fate, like it's all decided by God, to human agency.
Okay.
Hamlet isn't just following some preordained plan. He's making choices, and they have consequences, real consequences.
It makes the stakes so
Mhm.
much higher, right?
Sure.
It's
Yeah,
not just about what God wants, it's about what these characters want and how their actions affect everything around them.
exactly. And I think that's a big part of why these plays are still so captivating, even after all these centuries,
All right.
because we're still wrestling with the same questions.
Right.
Free will, individual responsibility. Like what happens because of the choices we make?
Now, speaking of captivating audiences, this era gave us some seriously big name playwrights.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You can't talk about Renaissance theater without talking about William Shakespeare.
I mean, for a lot of people, Shakespeare is basically synonymous with theater.
Drama. His plays, they're still performed, all over the world and studied uh, everywhere. He was just like this master storyteller, weaving together comedy and tragedy and history, even romance, and all in these ways that still resonate with people today. Think about Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth.
Yeah.
They're not just some historical thing, they're alive, living, breathing works of art.
And it wasn't just Shakespeare. Who else should we be adding to our Renaissance playlist, so to speak?
Oh, you have to include Christopher Marlowe. He was known for this a powerful verse and these really intense tragedies. Dr. Faustus is a classic, like a scholar making a deal with the devil, sells his soul for knowledge and power.
Wow. Now that's a story that would definitely get your attention. Anyone else we need to know about?
Ben Jonson,
Yep.
another big name. He was a master of satire and social commentary, like using comedy to hold up a mirror to society, poking fun at all those human flaws, greed, hypocrisy, and all that. Still so relevant today.
So plays like Volpone and the Alchemist.
Exactly. They're hilarious, but they also make you think about the darker sides of human nature. It's that mix of entertainment and social critique that makes them so fascinating.
It's incredible how these playwrights, they all have their own unique style, but they all capture the spirit of their time so well. And one of the things that ties them all together is this shared language, verse.
Yeah. It was the way to express yourself in Renaissance theater. And for good reason.
What do you mean?
It wasn't just about rhyming. It was about using language in a heightened, really powerful way to express complex ideas and emotions.
So when you say verse, is there a specific type we should be thinking of?
Iambic pentameter.
Mm-mm.
It's this rhythmic pattern of like stressed and unstressed syllables. It flows so naturally, like the heartbeat of the English language. And Shakespeare, especially, he used it like a master to create drama and poetry in his plays.
Now, even I know that Shakespeare used blank verse a lot. What is that, and why was it so popular?
Well, it's basically iambic pentameter, but without the rhyme. It gave the playwrights this amazing flexibility to, create dialogue that sounded natural, but still had that elevated poetic quality.
So they weren't just writing like flowery poems, they were crafting dialogue that like people could actually connect with.
Exactly. And they could easily switch between verse for those grand dramatic moments, and then prose, which is more like everyday speech for more down-to-earth scenes.
So they would use prose for the common folk and verse for the nobles, or like for different types of scenes.
Yes, think of it like adding different instruments to an orchestra. Prose adds that touch of realism, while verse, elevates the
Yeah.
language and creates a sense of awe.
It's like they're playing with different textures and tones to keep the audience on the edge of their seats. Now, one of the things I've always found fascinating about these plays are those soliloquies.
Oh yeah.
Like those moments where a character steps out of the scene and talks directly to the audience, revealing their like deepest thoughts.
You're getting a glimpse into their minds, their doubts, their hopes, their fears.
Yeah.
Super effective.
Like we're getting this privileged access to their inner world.
Exactly. Think about Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy. It's not just some philosophical thought. It's a window into his soul, his struggle with life and death.
It makes those internal battles like so real, so relatable. It's not just about what they do, it's about what they think, what they feel.
Exactly. And that's where the real power of Renaissance drama lies. It's not just telling a story, it's exploring what it means to be human.
And all of this was happening on surprisingly minimalist stages.
Oh.
No fancy sets, no like elaborate special effects. So tell us about the Renaissance stage and how it impacted like the experience for the audience.
All right, picture this. A bare stage. Maybe a couple pillars or a balcony to suggest a location, but the focus was all on the words, the actors' performances, and the audience using their imagination.
So no elaborate backdrops or like realistic scenery. So how did they transport audiences to all these different locations?
It was all about suggestion and symbolism.
Mm.
A throne could be a royal court, a few trees, you're in a forest. Props were used really strategically, too, to set the scene and the mood.
So it was more about creating a feeling and impression than like an exact copy.
Yes. And this actually made scene changes faster and the storytelling more fluid.
Uh-huh.
Without big sets to move, the action moved quickly. It kept the audience engaged.
That makes sense. But if the sets were so minimal, where did the visual, richness come from?
Costumes. Renaissance costumes were so elaborate, and there's a good reason for that.
It wasn't just about looking fancy then. There was a reason behind it.
Oh, yeah. Don't forget, this was a time when what you wore said everything about your social status, what you did for work, even your personality. A king wouldn't be caught dead in peasant clothes, and a villain might wear dark colors to show he was, well, evil.
So the costumes were like visual cues, like instantly telling the audience who these characters were, what they were about.
Exactly. And they didn't skimp on the details. Rich fabrics, intricate embroidery, jewels, furs.
Wow.
They were designed to make a statement, a visual spectacle.
Okay, so imagine bare stage, simple set pieces, and then these actors come out in these incredibly detailed costumes. Really brings those characters to life. What about props? Do they use those in a similar way?
Yeah, they had to be carefully chosen because they each carried symbolic meaning. A sword that could be power or violence, a crown, royalty. Even a handkerchief could be about love or betrayal, depending on how it's used.
So even with limited resources, they managed to create these really rich and layered worlds, all through the strategic use of costumes and props.
Okay.
And let's not forget the music and sound. I bet they use that to like really ramp up the emotional impact of the play.
Oh, yeah. They didn't have the fancy sound systems we have now, but music, it created atmosphere and heightened the emotional moments of the play. They used trumpets, drums, lutes, even voices.
I can only imagine what it must have been like to hear like a sad song during a death scene or a fanfare announcing the king, like chills. So where were the venues? Where did people go to actually see these plays?
You had two main types of theaters. First, the open-air amphitheaters, like the Globe Theatre in London.
That's the one that Shakespeare's most associated with, right?
That's the one. They were open to the public, so you have all kinds of people in the audience. From groundlings standing in the pit, just paying a penny, to the wealthy folks enjoying their covered seats.
Wow. That must have been quite an experience to have people from all walks of life coming together to share these stories. What was the other type of venue?
Indoor playhouses, like the Blackfriars Theater, they were smaller and more um, exclusive, higher ticket prices.
Yeah.
So they catered to a more elite audience.
So it's like the difference between seeing, I don't know, a rock concert in a stadium versus going to a smaller jazz club. Like, totally different vibes.
Exactly. And this variety of venues really shows you how popular theater was during the Renaissance. It wasn't just for the wealthy, it was something that everyone was into, a real cultural phenomenon.
It's amazing to think of these plays, written so long ago, being enjoyed by such a wide range of people.
And that speaks to their enduring power.
Yeah.
These plays dealt with universal themes that, still resonate with us today. Doesn't matter where you come from or your social status.
And they did it with such artistry. The language, the characters, the way they staged everything, it all came together to create these truly immersive experiences.
It was a collaborative art form that needed the audience to actively participate, to use their imaginations to fill in the gaps.
It's like the actors and the audience were creating these worlds together, which it makes me wonder what it would have been like to be in that audience, seeing one of these plays for the very first time.
Oh, I bet it was spectacular.
Huh.
The energy, the excitement, just the sheer emotional impact of the stories and the actors.
We've covered so much in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about the cultural changes that, set the stage for Renaissance theater, met the playwrights who made it happen, and even gotten a glimpse behind the scenes at how they put it all together. But I feel like we've only just scratched the
Oh, we
surface.
have. There's so much more to talk about. But before we move on, I'm curious, what stood out to you so far? What sparked your curiosity?
Yeah, let us know what you think. We'll be back soon to continue our journey into the fascinating world of Renaissance theater.
Welcome back to our exploration of Renaissance theater. It's wild to think about these plays being performed, like hundreds of years ago.
Hmm.
But the stuff they're wrestling with, it's still so relevant today.
It's like they hit on something fundamental about what it means to be human, Something that just transcends time and place. So what are some of those timeless themes that really jump out at you?
One of the biggies is this idea of how complex human nature really is. The playwrights of the Renaissance, they didn't shy away from showing us the good and the bad, the noble and the selfish, all mixed up in the same character.
So no, clear-cut heroes and villains then.
Not always, no.
Yeah.
These characters, they were driven by, all sorts of things. Just like us, they made choices, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and they lived with the consequences. I think that's what makes them so relatable, even when they're doing stuff that's kind of morally questionable.
Is that what makes a play like Macbeth so powerful? I mean, he's this ambitious general who does these horrible things, but you also see him struggling inside. The guilt, the paranoia, it's like eating him alive.
Exactly. It's a tragedy, for sure. But it's also this really profound exploration of how power can corrupt and how seductive ambition can be. And those are themes that are just as relevant today as they were back then.
It's like those plays are holding up a mirror, forcing us to confront the darker parts of ourselves.
That's the power of great art, isn't it? Makes us think about who we are, what we believe, the choices we make. And Renaissance theater, it's full of characters wrestling with these huge moral dilemmas.
Like Hamlet, totally torn between getting revenge and listening to his conscience. Or Othello, consumed by jealousy and tricked into doing this horrific thing.
Yeah, yeah. The plays are full of those gray areas, those moments where it's hard to tell what's right and wrong, and they make us, the audience, confront those uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
And the way they did it, the language they used, is just so captivating. The poetry, the images, the way the words just flow. It's like they're painting these vivid pictures with their words.
That's the power of verse, right? Especially iambic pentameter.
Hmm.
It's got this rhythm and flow that just pulls you in, creates a sense of drama, of urgency, even in the quiet moments.
It's like the language itself is another character in the play. It's not just telling you what's happening, it's creating a whole emotional experience.
And then you add in those incredible soliloquies, and it's like we're, right there in the characters' heads,
Yeah.
hearing their deepest thoughts and feelings.
Like we're eavesdropping on their most private moments.
Yeah. And it makes everything so real, so immediate. Their struggles, their triumphs, their heartbreaks, we see ourselves in them, even if their lives are totally different from our own.
It's those shared human experiences that make the place so timeless, right? I mean, we may not be princes or kings dealing with crazy existential crises, but we all know what it's like to love, to lose, to feel betrayed, to want something more.
Totally. And we can't forget, Renaissance theater wasn't all serious and gloomy. They knew how to have fun, too.
Oh, right. The comedies, they're hilarious.
Yeah, they're this perfect counterpoint to all the tragedies, full of wit and wordplay, mistaken identities, these absurd situations that are still funny today.
Like A Midsummer Night's Dream or The Alchemist, they're just pure fun.
Exactly. They remind us that even when things are tough, there's always room for laughter, a bit of lightheartedness. And it's that blend, the profound and the playful, the tragic and the comic. It's what makes Renaissance theater so rich.
It really does. And it's amazing to think that all this exploration of humanity, all these brilliant stories, it was all happening on these, relatively simple stages.
Right. No fancy sets, no crazy special effects. The focus was all on the actors, the language, and the audience using their imagination.
So describe it for us. What did a typical Renaissance stage actually look like?
Okay, so imagine like a bare platform, maybe a few pillars or a balcony to give you an idea of the location, but that's it. No elaborate backdrops, no realistic scenery. It was all about the power of suggestion.
So how did they create different settings then? Did they just rely on the actors to tell you where they were?
They had a few tricks up their sleeves. Props were super important for setting the scene and the mood. A throne, that means you're in a royal court. A skull, maybe a graveyard. A few trees, and suddenly you're in a forest.
So they used these visual cues, these symbols to spark the audience's imagination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And without these big, complicated sets to move around, they could change scenes really quickly and keep the action moving.
That makes sense. But what about costumes? We know they were a big deal in Renaissance theater. Why all the fuss about those elaborate costumes?
Well, the costumes, they were way more than just decoration. They told you everything you needed to know about the characters. You got to remember, back then, clothes were a huge symbol of your social status, your job, even your personality.
So, a king wouldn't be caught dead in, rags, and a villain would probably be dressed in dark, moody colors.
Exactly. The audience needed to know right away who these people were and what they were all about, and they went all out on the details. Rich fabrics, fancy embroidery, jewels, furs. The costumes were often the most expensive part of the whole production.
It's like they were walking works of art. So you've got this bare stage, a few simple props, and then these actors come out in these incredible detailed costumes. It must have really brought those characters to life. What about props? Did they use those in a similar way?
Oh, for sure. Each prop was carefully chosen because of its symbolic meaning. A sword might represent power or violence. A crown means royalty. Even a simple handkerchief could be a symbol of love or betrayal.
It's amazing how they use these everyday objects to add these whole other layers of meaning to the play.
It's all about weaving together this rich tapestry of visual and symbolic language.
And let's not forget about music and sound. They must have used that to really amp up the emotions of the plays.
Totally. They didn't have the technology we have now, but they knew how to use music to create atmosphere, build tension, underscore those big emotional moments. They used trumpets, drums, lutes, even voices.
I bet it was incredible to hear that mournful song during a death scene or the triumphant fanfare as the king enters. Chills.
It must have been amazing to experience. And, it reminds us that even with limited resources, they could still create these really immersive, impactful theatrical experiences.
It's incredible how they managed to transport the audience to all these different worlds using just a few basic things.
It speaks of the power of imagination,
Right.
both for the people creating the play and the people watching it. They knew that the real magic of theater is in that shared experience, that collaborative storytelling.
Makes you wonder what it would have been like to be in that audience, caught up in the drama, the spectacle.
I would love to hop in a time machine and see it for myself.
Yeah.
But for now, we have to use our imaginations.
Which is fitting, considering how much Renaissance theater relied on the audience to use theirs.
Exactly. It's all connected.
So we've talked about the themes, the language, the stagecraft, but there's this one big question we still need to address. Why does any of this matter to us today?
The million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Why should we care about these plays that were written centuries ago?
It's easy to think of them as relics from the past, but I really think we can still learn a lot from them. What do you think?
I totally agree. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned as we explore the legacy of Renaissance theater and what it can teach us about ourselves, about storytelling, and about how art can connect us across time. Welcome back to our deep dive into Renaissance theater. We've traveled through the cultural landscape, met the playwrights, and even peeked behind the curtain to see how they staged their productions. But now for the big question, Why does this era of theater, centuries old, still matter to us today?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It's easy to dismiss it all as just like historical stuff, classic literature,
Yeah.
but that would be missing the point entirely.
Right. It's not just about checking off a box like, oh, I've read Shakespeare and moving on. There's something deeper that keeps these plays alive, something that still makes them resonate with people all these years later.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to this. Renaissance theater was all about exploring, like, what it means to be human. Love, loss, ambition, betrayal, the desire for meaning, purpose. These aren't just themes that were relevant back then. They're the very things that make us who we are, no
Right.
matter when or where we live.
It's like those playwrights, they had this almost supernatural ability to tack into like the core of human experience, and they did it with such depth and complexity. These weren't like simple morality plays with good guys and bad guys.
Nope. The characters we meet in Renaissance theater, they're complicated. They're flawed. They contradict themselves. They make good choices. They make bad choices. And we see the consequences play out. It makes them so relatable, even if their lives are completely different from our own.
Think of Hamlet, for example. He's a prince, sure, but he's also this like deeply conflicted individual, dealing with grief and betrayal and this huge burden of revenge. Those are emotions we all understand, no matter who we are.
Exactly. And that's what makes these playwrights so brilliant. They created characters that were, like, totally rooted in their own time, yet completely universal at the same time.
And the way they use language, it's incredible. The poetry, the imagery, the wordplay, it's not just about telling you what's happening, it's about creating this whole experience, this world you can step into and feel.
And in a world where everything is, like, instant and disposable, I think there's something really powerful about taking the time to appreciate language that's been so carefully crafted.
It reminds us of how powerful words can be, how they can move us, challenge us, and make us see things in a whole new light. And let's not forget, these plays were meant to be seen, to be experienced. They're full of life, energy, humor, spectacle. It's not just words on a page.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Even though their stagecraft might seem simple compared to what we're used to now, they knew how to create these incredibly engaging experiences. It was all about that interaction between the actors, the language, and the audience's own imagination.
So we've talked about the themes, the language, the staging. But if we had to sum it all up, what would it be? Why does Renaissance theater still matter to us today?
I think it all comes back to this idea of how art can connect us across time, across cultures. It shows us that even with all our differences, we all share these basic human experiences.
It's like looking in a mirror, seeing ourselves, but it's also a window into another time, another world.
And in a world that feels so divided sometimes, I think that's a really powerful message.
It really is. So, to everyone listening, if you haven't already, I urge you, dive into the world of Renaissance theater, pick up a play by Shakespeare, Marlowe, Johnson, go see a performance if you get the chance.
You might be surprised at how much these plays still speak to us even after all these years. And you never know. You might even discover a new favorite playwright.
And on that note, it's been an absolute pleasure exploring this era of theater with you.
Me too. And it doesn't have to end here. There's a whole world of Renaissance theater out there waiting to be discovered.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those imaginations working.